At 1:12 a.m., my son called me from a holding cell and whispered, "Mom, she hit me first." By the time I walked into that station, a deputy couldn't even look me in the eye. I remember exactly what I was doing before the phone rang. I was sitting in my recliner with my reading glasses halfway down my nose, flipping through old photos on my phone. There was one of Eli at maybe 8 years old, standing on the front porch with a melting popsicle dripping down his wrist, smiling like he didn't have a single worry in the world. I had just zoomed in on that picture, his cheeks still round back then when the phone lit up in my hand. Eli, that alone wasn't strange. Teenagers call at odd hours sometimes, but something in my chest tightened anyway. Maybe it was the hour. Maybe it was a mother's instinct that never quite turns off. I answered on the second ring. "Hey baby, what's—" "Mom." He didn't say anything else right away. I could hear breathing, not crying, not exactly, just tight. "Eli," I sat up straight. "Where are you?" I'm at the station. They said I can call you." Everything inside me went still. "What station?" "Knox County. Mom, she." His voice cracked, then dropped lower like he didn't want anyone else to hear. "She hit me first." My hand gripped the armrest so hard my fingers hurt. "Who did—" "Danielle." Of course it was Danielle. "And now she's telling them I attacked her," he said quickly. "I didn't, Mom. I swear I didn't touch her." "I believe you. I was already standing looking for my keys. I'm coming right now. Don't say anything else to anyone. Do you hear me?" "Yes, ma'am." "I'll be there soon." I hung up, and for a second I just stood there in the middle of my living room, my house too quiet, the hum of the refrigerator louder than it had any right to be. Then everything hit at once. I grabbed my purse. My keys didn't even change out of my old t-shirt and flannel pants. I slipped on the first pair of shoes I could find, didn't even match, and headed out the door. The night air hit me warm and damp, that thick Tennessee kind that clings to your skin. Crickets were loud enough that it almost felt wrong for something bad to be happening at the same time. I got in my truck and drove. I don't remember half the lights I passed. I just remember my thoughts racing ahead of me. Danielle. Her soft voice, her perfect posture, the way she smiled in photos like she belonged in one of those church newsletters. Praying for our family during this season she'd posted just last week, little yellow heart at the end. I gripped the steering wheel tighter. By the time I pulled into the Knox County Juvenile Center, my hands were shaking, but my head was clear. That's something I learned over the years. You can be scared, you can be angry, but when it comes to your child, you don't get to fall apart. Not yet. Not until they're safe. The building looked exactly like you'd expect, too bright for the hour. Fluorescent lights buzzing overhead, a vending machine glowing in the corner like it had all the answers if you just fed it enough quarters. I walked up to the desk. The young deputy behind it glanced up, clearly not expecting someone like me at almost 2 a.m. "Can I help you, ma'am?" "My son," I said. "Eli Harlan, he called me." He started typing, then paused. Harlan. He looked up again, squinting slightly. "Are you Sandra Harlan?" "Sandy," I said. "Yes." Something changed in his face. Not dramatically, just enough. "Oh," he cleared his throat. "Yes, ma'am. I remember you. You helped my aunt with some paperwork a couple years back, for my cousin." I recognized him then. Not by name, but by that situation, a messy guardianship case. I'd volunteered through a local advocacy program. "You got him out of a bad situation," he added quietly. I nodded once. "Is my son okay?" "Yes, ma'am, he's in a holding room. We just need to—" He hesitated. "We need to go over a few things." I didn't sit. "I'd like to see him first." He shifted in his chair, then stood. "Yes, ma'am, right this way." He didn't look me in the eye as he led me down the hallway. The room they had Eli in was small. Metal table, 2 chairs, walls that had seen more arguments than apologies. He was sitting there, elbows on his knees, staring at the floor, wearing that same blue button-down shirt. I stopped in the doorway for half a second. I knew that shirt. I bought it for him 2 years ago for a school presentation. He'd been nervous, said he didn't want to look stupid. I told him that shirt made him look like someone people would listen to. He looked smaller in it now. "Ellie." He looked up fast. "Mom." That was all it took. I crossed the room and pulled him into a hug before he could even stand up fully. He held on to me tight, harder than he had in years. "I didn't do anything," he said into my shoulder. "I know," I said. "I know you didn't." I leaned back just enough to look at him. There was a faint redness along his jaw. Not dramatic, not the kind that gets attention in photos, but I saw it. And his wrist. There was a mark there too, like fingers had wrapped too tight. My stomach turned. "Tell me what happened," I said quietly. He swallowed, looked past me for a second like he was replaying it. "She said I was being disrespectful. I wasn't. I didn't answer her fast enough." He shook his head. "She got mad. She slapped me. Then when I said, 'Don't touch me,' she started yelling. And next thing I know, she's on the phone saying I attacked her." I closed my eyes for 1 second. "Just one." Then I opened them again. "Okay," I said, "we're going to handle this." He nodded, but I could see it, the doubt, the fear that maybe the world had already made up its mind about him. "I don't think they believe me," he said. I reached over and took his hand. "Then we'll make sure they don't have to guess." It took another 30 minutes before they let him out into my custody. 30 minutes of forms, of polite voices saying careful things, of that same deputy avoiding my eyes more and more as the story settled in. At one point he muttered, "I'm sorry, I didn't realize." I didn't respond. Not yet. Because sorry doesn't fix a boy sitting in a holding room for something he didn't do. When we finally walked out into the parking lot, the sky was just starting to shift. Not light yet, but not completely dark either. That in-between time? Eli climbed into the passenger seat, quiet again. I started the engine, then glanced over at him. "You okay?" He nodded. But I knew that nod. It meant I will be, not yet. The drive home was quiet. About halfway there, he spoke again. "This isn't the first time," he said. My hands tightened on the wheel. "What do you mean?" She's done stuff before. Not like this, but..." He trailed off. "I just didn't want to make it worse." I swallowed hard. "How long?" He shrugged. "A while." I nodded slowly. Every mile of that drive felt heavier than the last. When we got home, I told him to shower, get into something comfortable. "I'll make you something to eat," I said. "I'm not hungry." "Just in case," I replied. He didn't argue. While he was in the bathroom, I picked up his backpack from the floor. His phone was inside. Screen cracked slightly at the corner. I hesitated. Then I unlocked it. He'd told me the passcode years ago. Never changed it. I wasn't sure what I expected. But it wasn't that. Voice memos. More than one. I pressed play on the first. Danielle's voice filled the quiet kitchen. Soft, controlled, almost calm. "You think you can just ignore me in my own house?" Then Eli's voice, smaller, careful. "I wasn't ignoring you." A sharp sound. Then silence. My hand trembled slightly as I stopped the recording. I opened another. More words, more tension, more proof that something had been wrong for longer than I'd allowed myself to see. I leaned against the counter, staring at nothing. Then I whispered, barely loud enough for myself to hear. "I should have seen this sooner." From down the hall, I heard the shower turn off. And something inside me shifted. Not loud, not dramatic. Just steady. This wasn't confusion anymore. This wasn't a misunderstanding. This was something else. And I wasn't going to let anyone tell my son's story for him. The next morning came too fast. I don't think I slept more than an hour, maybe 2. I remember sitting at the kitchen table sometime before sunrise, that same old notebook open in front of me, a pen in my hand, staring at a blank page. I've carried that notebook for years. It's nothing special, just a worn brown cover, a little warped from a coffee spill I never quite cleaned right. Inside, it's a mix of everything: grocery lists, doctor appointments, things Greg used to promise and never follow through on. Little notes I'd written to myself when I was trying to make sense of a marriage that kept shifting under my feet. I don't even remember when I started writing things down like that. I just know it helped me hold on to what was real. That morning, I turned to a fresh page and wrote, 1:12 a.m., Eli called from Knox County, said Danielle hit him. I paused, then added, visible marks jaw wrist. The pen pressed harder than it needed to. Eli came into the kitchen around 7:30, hair still damp, wearing one of my old t-shirts. He looked smaller, not physically, just the way someone looks after something knocks the wind out of them and it hasn't come back yet. "You want cereal?" I asked. He shrugged. Sure. I poured 2 bowls, nothing fancy, just something normal. We sat across from each other, spoons clinking against ceramic in a quiet that felt heavier than it should have. After a minute, he said, Are you going to call Dad? I looked at him. I will, I said, but not yet. He nodded slowly like he understood more than I'd said out loud. The phone rang before I had the chance. Unknown number. I answered anyway. Hello? A soft inhale, then, Sandy. Danielle. Of course. Her voice sounded exactly the way it always did. Calm, gentle, just a hint of something wounded underneath. I'm so glad you picked up, she said. I've been worried sick about Eli. I closed my eyes for half a second. What do you want, Danielle? A small pause, then a sigh like she was trying very hard to stay composed. I don't understand what happened last night, she said. He's been so difficult lately. I've been trying to help him, Sandy, really. But he gets so angry and I don't know where he's learning that kind of behavior. I hung up. Just like that. No warning, no goodbye. My hand was shaking when I set the phone down. Eli looked up at me from across the table. That was her, wasn't it? Yeah. What did she say? I let out a slow breath. She said she's trying to help you. He gave a small, humorless laugh, the kind that hurts to hear. Yeah, he said, that sounds like her. That's when I made my first mistake. I picked the phone back up. And I called Greg. He answered on the 3rd ring, voice groggy. Sandy, what's going on? What's going on? I repeated. Your son spent the night in a holding cell, Greg. That's what's going on. Silence on the other end. Then I talked to Danielle. She said, Eli. I don't care what Danielle said, I cut in. I was there, I saw him, he had marks on him. Another pause. Longer this time. Sandy. You know how teenagers can be, he said finally. They get emotional. Things escalate. I felt something inside me go very, very still. Are you listening to yourself right now, I asked. I'm just saying we don't have the full picture yet. I do, I said. I heard it. Heard what? I hesitated. And that hesitation, that was the problem. Because in that half second, Greg filled in the silence his own way. Sandy, don't start digging into things and making them bigger than they are, he said a little sharper now. Danielle's under a lot of stress. Church stuff, the house, everything. She's been trying really hard with Eli. I stared at the wall in front of me. Trying, I repeated quietly. Yes, he said, trying. I nodded slowly, even though he couldn't see me. Okay, I said. And I hung up. I knew the second I ended that call that I'd made things worse. Greg would tell Danielle. Danielle would adjust. People like her always do. By noon it started. A message from a neighbor I barely spoke to. Heard there was some trouble last night. Hope everything's okay. Then another. Then a Facebook post. I didn't even follow Danielle, but someone sent me a screenshot. There she was, smiling, head tilted just enough to look soft. A picture of Eli from last Christmas beside her. Caption. Loving my stepson through a difficult season. Praying for healing and peace in our home. I felt my jaw tighten. Anyone who didn't know better would think she was a saint. That afternoon I drove out to see Rhonda. She worked at a small family law office over in Maryville, nothing fancy. But she'd been in that world long enough to know how things actually worked, not how people wished they did. She listened to everything without interrupting. The call, the station, the recordings. When I finished, she leaned back in her chair and looked at me. You called Greg, didn't you? I sighed. Yeah. She nodded once. Okay. That bad. It's not good, she said. But it's not the end of the world either. I rubbed my forehead. What do I do? She reached over, pulled a legal pad toward her, then pushed it in my direction. You stop talking, she said, and you start writing. I frowned. Writing what? Everything she said. Dates, times, what was said, what you saw, what Eli tells you, what you can prove, what you can't prove yet. I stared at the pad. That's it. That's everything, she replied. You don't win this by arguing with her, Sandy. You win this by letting her talk and making sure there's a record when she does. On the way home, I stopped at Walmart. I stood in the office supplies aisle longer than I probably needed to. Binders, tabs, pens. It felt almost ridiculous. Like I was preparing for a school project instead of whatever this was. But then I thought about Eli sitting in that room. About the way he'd said, "I don't think they believe me." And I grabbed a blue 3-ring binder. Then a pack of dividers. Then a set of black pens. At the checkout, the cashier smiled at me. "Big project?" she asked. I gave a small smile back. Something like that. That night after Eli went to bed, I sat at the kitchen table again. The binder open. My old notebook beside it. I started transferring things over. Organizing. Labeling. Trying to make sense of pieces that didn't want to fit. Receipts, dates, notes. And then something else. In the middle of a stack of printed bank statements Greg had emailed me months ago, something I'd barely glanced at back then, I saw it. A charge. Not huge, not enough to raise alarms on its own. But out of place. A boutique jewelry store in Knoxville. I flipped back a few pages. There it was again. And again. All around the same time Eli had mentioned things getting worse. My stomach tightened. It wasn't proof. Not yet. But it was something. And something was enough to start. I leaned back in my chair and looked at the binder. Then at the notebook. Then at my hands. I wasn't a lawyer. I wasn't a detective. I was a 49-year-old office manager who knew how to keep track of things. And suddenly, that felt like exactly what this situation needed. From down the hall I heard Eli shift in his room. A floorboard creaked. I closed the binder slowly, picked up my pen, and wrote one more line at the bottom of the page. "Danielle talks a lot, let her..." That night Eli didn't go to bed right away. I could hear him moving around in his room drawer, opening, closing footsteps, pacing, then stopping. The kind of movement that doesn't mean activity. It means your mind won't let you sit still. Around midnight I poured myself a glass of water and found him in the kitchen. He was standing there in the dim light, staring into the fridge like he'd forgotten what he came for. "You okay?" I asked. He nodded, then shook his head. "I don't know," he said. I walked over, grabbed a box of cereal and set it on the counter. "Sit," I told him. He did. We poured 2 bowls and sat across from each other again, same as that morning. The clock on the microwave read 12:17 a.m. Funny how quickly a day can feel like it's looping. After a few bites, he said quietly, "What if people think I'm lying?" I didn't answer right away. I let the question sit there between us for a second. Then I said, "Then we make sure they don't have to guess." He looked at me. Not fully convinced, but listening. "That's what we're doing now," I added. "We're not yelling. We're not chasing anyone. We're just getting it right." He nodded slowly. "Okay." The next few days settled into something that almost felt like routine. Not a good one, not a normal one, but a rhythm. I went to work, came home, sat at the table, opened the binder. Wrote things down. Eli stayed close, quieter than usual. He spent more time in his room door half open like he didn't want to be too alone. Every once in a while he'd come out and say something small. "She told Dad I broke that lamp. I didn't." Or, "That bruise she showed them. She got that from bumping into the counter. I saw it." I wrote it all down. Dates, times, details. I didn't react much, not out loud. Inside, though, it built. By midweek, things started shifting outside the house, too. Eli came home from school one afternoon and dropped his backpack by the door harder than usual. "What happened?" I asked. He shrugged. "Nothing." I waited. He stood there a second, then said, "People are talking." My chest tightened. "What are they saying?" "That that I went after her." He gave a short laugh. "One kid asked if I got like anger issues now." I felt my jaw clench. Who told them that? He didn't answer. He didn't have to. That night I sat at the table longer than usual. The binder open in front of me. My notebook beside it. I flipped through pages slowly. Receipts, notes, dates. Trying to connect pieces without forcing them. That's something you learn over time too. You can't shove a story together just because you want it to make sense. You have to let it show itself. And then the phone buzzed. A text. From Paula Jean. "You got a minute?" I hadn't heard from her in a while. Greg's older sister. The one person in that family who never quite bought into Danielle's act. I called her. She picked up on the first ring. "Sandy." "Hey." There was a pause. "I heard about Eli," she said. "Yeah." Another pause. Then, "You mind if I come by tomorrow?" Of course not. She showed up the next afternoon in her old silver SUV, the one that always sounded like it was thinking about breaking down but never quite did. She walked in without much ceremony, looked around the kitchen, then at me. "You look tired," she said. "Feel about the same." She nodded. Then she reached into her bag. "I brought something," she said. She pulled out her phone and set it on the table. "There's a video on here," she added, "from a couple weeks ago." I frowned. "Of what?" "Just watch." I pressed play. It was shaky at first, dashcam footage, the angle a little off. Then it steadied. And there it was. The front of Greg's house. Eli standing near the driveway. Danielle a few feet away from him. I turned the volume up. "You don't get to talk to me like that," Danielle was saying, her voice sharper than I'd ever heard it in person. "I didn't say anything," Eli replied. "Don't lie to me." "I'm not." "Don't lie." There was a pause. Then, "If you keep this up," she said quieter, "now you're not going to like how this ends." Eli didn't respond. He just stood there. And in the background, just barely visible near the garage, was Greg. Watching. Not stepping in. Not saying a word. I stopped the video. The room felt smaller. "When was this?" I asked. 2 weeks ago, Paula Jean said. "I was driving by. Didn't think much of it at the time. Just thought she was being herself." I nodded slowly. "This helps," I said. "It does," she agreed. That night I added another section to the binder. Witness/video. I slid a printed still from the footage into a plastic sleeve. Then I sat back and stared at it. Greg in the background. Doing nothing. I don't know why that part hit harder than the rest. Maybe because it wasn't loud. It wasn't dramatic. It was just absence. A couple days later I got another call. This time from Marcia. She'd been going over some of the financial documents Rhonda sent her. "You got a minute?" she asked. "Yeah." "I think Danielle's been moving money around," she said. I leaned forward. "What kind of money?" "Nothing massive," Marcia replied, "but enough to notice if you're paying attention. Small transfers, personal purchases that don't line up with what Greg thinks is happening." I thought about the jewelry charges. The timing. Why, I asked. "Could be a lot of reasons," she said, "but if she's planning to push Eli out of that house, financial control would be part of it." I exhaled slowly. So it wasn't just about control. It was about positioning. That night I sat in my truck in the Food City parking lot. Didn't even realize I'd driven there until I looked up and saw the sign. My hands were still on the wheel. The binder sat in the passenger seat. I stared at it for a long time. All those pages. All those pieces. And still it felt like it might not be enough. I felt something in my chest tighten. Then break. I leaned forward, rested my forehead against the steering wheel and let myself cry. Not loud. Just enough to get it out. Because I couldn't do that in front of Eli. When I got home, the house was quiet. Eli's door was open. He was lying on his bed staring at the ceiling. I leaned against the doorframe. "Hey." He turned his head. "Hey." I walked in and sat on the edge of the bed. For a second, neither of us said anything. Then he asked, "Are we going to be okay?" I looked at him. Really looked. And I said, "Yeah." Not because I was sure, but because I knew I wasn't going to stop until it was true. Later that night, I sat at the table again. The binder open. The notebook beside it. I flipped through everything slowly. Not rushing. Not forcing. Just letting it come together. Then I closed it, rested my hand on top, and said out loud to no one in particular, "Okay." A pause. Then quieter. Let her talk. By the time we got to court, I was so tired I felt hollowed out. Not weak, not confused, just worn thin in that deep bone-level way that comes from weeks of holding yourself together because other people are falling apart. It was a Thursday morning in Knoxville, damp and gray, and the courthouse smelled like old paper-burnt coffee and floor cleaner. The lights overhead had that flat fluorescent buzz that makes everyone look a little sick. Marcia met us by the security line in a navy blazer and low heels, carrying a leather folder thick enough to do damage if she swung it. "You all right?" she asked me. "No," I said. She gave the smallest nod. "Good. Means you understand what room you're walking into." That was Marcia. Never dramatic, never false comforting. I appreciated that. Eli stood beside me in khakis and the same blue button-down shirt he'd worn the night I picked him up. He'd wanted to wear something else, I could tell. But that shirt had become something to him, maybe to both of us. Proof that the boy sitting in that cold room was still himself, still worth seeing clearly. "You okay?" I asked him. He looked toward the courtroom doors and swallowed. "I think so." "You don't have to be brave," I said quietly. "You just have to tell the truth." He nodded. Across the hall, Danielle arrived right on time. Of course she did. She wore a pale pink blouse, a cream cardigan pearls, and the kind of careful makeup that says I'm upset but still composed. She even had a soft brace wrapped around one wrist. I nearly laughed when I saw it, but there was nothing funny in how calculated it was. Greg came in behind her looking 10 years older than the last time I'd seen him. His tie sat crooked, his shoulders were slumped. He looked like a man who hadn't been sleeping well and didn't want to know why. He glanced at Eli once, then looked away. That hurt my son more than I think Greg will ever understand. Danielle saw us and put a hand lightly over her chest like she was wounded by our presence. "Sandy," she said softly, as if we'd run into each other at church instead of juvenile court. I didn't answer. Marcia did. "Save it for the room, Danielle." Danielle's expression changed for half a second. Not much, just enough for me to see the irritation under the sweetness. Then it was gone. The hearing itself started the way these things often do. Too formal for the mess underneath it. Names on the record, posture, procedure, everybody pretending this was just another matter on the docket. The judge was a woman in her 60s, with silver hair cut neat at the jaw, and reading glasses she kept sliding on and off depending on who was speaking. She didn't waste words, which I liked immediately. Danielle's attorney went first. He painted a clean little picture: concerned stepmother, troubled teenage boy, escalating behavior in the home, fear, disorder, regret. Then Danielle took the stand. And if I hadn't known her, I might have believed her myself. Her voice trembled just enough. She dabbed at the corner of one eye once, not twice. Smart. Too much crying looks fake. One tear looks sincere. "I loved Eli from the beginning," she said. "I truly did. I wanted peace in that home. I wanted structure. I wanted him to feel supported." Marcia sat beside me without moving. Danielle went on. "But he's been angry for some time now, withdrawn, hostile. I kept trying to connect, but..." She lowered her eyes. "I was scared of him by the end." Eli stiffened next to me. I put a hand over his fist. Danielle described the night of the incident in soft, careful detail. Too careful. That was the first sign she was going too far. She added things that hadn't been in the original report. A shove into the wall. A threat muttered under his breath. Her fear when she realized she had no choice but to call the police. Marcia made one note on her yellow pad. That was it. I looked down and read what she'd written. Too polished, let her keep going. Danielle did. At one point she even said, "I've prayed every night for healing in this family." I almost choked on that. The judge didn't react, just wrote something down. Then it was Marcia's turn. And the whole room changed. There was nothing loud about the way she stood up. Nothing flashy. She walked to the front with that same folder, set it down, and looked at Danielle like she was about to ask for the weather. "Mrs. Harlan, she said you testified that on the morning after this alleged assault you were in too much pain to drive. Is that correct?" Danielle nodded, yes. Marcia flipped a page. "And that your wrist injury prevented you from leaving the home?" "Yes." Marcia nodded once. "All right." She held up a document. "Can you explain then why your debit card was used at 10:14 that morning at Tiffany Hill Boutique in West Knoxville?" Danielle blinked. Just once. Her lawyer leaned forward. "There may be an explanation for that," he said quickly. "I'm asking if she has one," Marcia replied. Danielle shifted in her seat. Someone else could have used my card." Marcia nodded again. "Possible. And your cell phone could also have been with that person." Danielle hesitated. "I suppose." Marcia stepped closer. "And your car?" No answer. The room got very quiet. Marcia laid out the next piece, then the next. Phone location data putting Danielle across town. A purchase record from the boutique. A time-stamped receipt from a coffee shop 5 minutes later. Then contractor invoices from the same week showing household damage she'd blamed on Eli had actually been documented before he was even home from school that day. Danielle's face had started to change by then. The softness was gone. Not all at once, just little cracks. Marcia didn't rush. That was the beauty of it. She asked about the bruise Danielle claimed came from Eli grabbing her arm. Then introduced a photo dated 2 days earlier where the same bruise was faintly visible in a church volunteer group picture. Danielle's attorney objected. The judge overruled him. I could hear somebody shifting in the back row. A chair creaked. Someone coughed. And still Marcia kept going. Mrs. Harlan, she said, did you or did you not tell this court that my client's son had become violent in recent weeks? Yes, Danielle said, but not as confidently now. All right, let's talk about 2 weeks ago. She handed the bailiff a still from Paula Jean's dashcam footage. I saw Greg lean forward before he even realized he was doing it. Marcia pressed play. Danielle's own voice filled the courtroom. Sharp, threatening, nothing saintly about it. If you keep this up, you're not going to like how this ends. Then the video angle widened enough to show Greg in the background. Watching. My heart hurt for Eli all over again. Greg went pale. Actually pale. I looked at him and saw the exact moment he understood that this was no longer a messy family misunderstanding. This was a pattern, and he had stood in the middle of it pretending not to see. Danielle's lawyer tried to recover. Verbal frustration does not prove physical aggression, he said. No, Marcia replied, but it does undermine the fiction that my client's son was the sole source of hostility in that house. Then she went for the real turn. Mrs. Harlan, she said, did you maintain written records of Eli's behavior? Danielle straightened, a little glad to have something prepared. Yes, she said, I did. Her attorney handed over a notebook. It had tabs in it, dates, neat entries, too neat. My stomach turned for a second. Then I saw Marcia's face. Calm. Interested. Almost kind. She flipped through the pages slowly. This is your journal. Yes. You wrote these entries over the course of the last year. I did. Marcia turned another page. Every one of them. Yes. Then she held up a page and asked, would you mind reading the entry dated January 14th? Danielle read it. Something about Eli slamming a door and frightening her. Marcia nodded. Thank you. Now can you explain why the wording in this entry is nearly identical to a draft email recovered from your laptop autosave files? Danielle froze. Her lawyer stood up so fast his chair scraped. The judge looked over her glasses. Sit down unless you have a legal basis. He sat. Marcia continued. Our forensic review of the home computer records shows multiple draft documents containing statements later copied into this handwritten journal. Several were created in one batch less than 3 weeks ago. The silence after that landed heavy. No one moved. No one breathed right. Greg turned and looked at Danielle like he'd never seen her before. What he said under his breath. It was barely audible. But in that room it might as well have been a shout. Danielle tried to speak. That's not, I was rewriting notes. I always rewrite notes. Marcia tilted her head slightly. All 12 months of them. Danielle opened her mouth. Closed it. Opened it again. Nothing. And there it was. Not the big movie confession, not the dramatic collapse. Something better. The truth sitting in the middle of the room while the lie slowly died around it. The judge removed her glasses and looked directly at Danielle. Mrs. Harlan, she said very evenly, this court has serious concerns regarding your credibility, your prior statements, and the apparent effort to manufacture documentation after the fact. Danielle's face drained. The judge turned a page, then continued. Based on the evidence presented here today, temporary custody is awarded to the child's mother effective immediately. The emergency protective claim is dismissed. The court is also referring portions of this matter for further review regarding false statements made in support of prior filings. No raised voice. No speech. Just consequences. Danielle started to cry then. Real or fake, I couldn't tell anymore. Her attorney put a hand on her arm. Greg didn't. He looked broken. Eli sat beside me very still. I reached for his hand. He grabbed mine so tight it almost hurt. I squeezed back. And whispered, it's over. He looked straight ahead, eyes wet, and nodded once. Out in the hallway afterward, people moved around us in that strange courthouse way, fast but quiet, like everyone's trying not to get tangled in someone else's disaster. Paula Jean came around the corner carrying a white bakery box. I didn't know if it was appropriate, she said, already crying. But Mama used to bring these when Greg got straight A's, and I thought, well, Sandy, honey, you earned the whole box. I laughed then. Actually laughed. The first real laugh in weeks. Victory Danishes, I asked. She nodded, wiping her eyes. Only thing I could think of. Then Greg appeared. Not from nowhere, just suddenly there. Sandy. I turned. He looked wrecked. His tie was loose now, shirt collar open like the day had pulled him apart by the seams. I didn't know, he said. I believed that part. And it made me angrier, not less. That's the problem, I told him. You didn't look. He flinched like I'd slapped him. Then he glanced at Eli. Son. Eli stepped closer to me. Just half a step. But Greg saw it. I saw him see it. And I think that hurt him more than anything the judge had said. You didn't lose me today, Greg, I said quietly. You lost him one piece at a time and you stood there while it happened. He started to say something. Stopped. There wasn't anything left to say. So I turned away. Paula Jean handed Eli the bakery box like it was something sacred. And the three of us walked out together. The first night Eli slept in my house again, he left his door open. Not wide, just enough. A crack of light from the hallway stretched across his floor like a line he didn't want to cross alone. I noticed it when I got up around 2 a.m. for a glass of water. I stood there for a second looking at that sliver of light, and something in my chest tightened, not the sharp kind of pain, but the kind that settles in and stays a while. I didn't say anything about it the next day. Some things you don't fix by pointing at them. You just stay close. Life didn't suddenly get easy after court. I wish it had. But the truth is, when something like that happens, when trust gets bent out of shape like that, it doesn't snap back overnight. Eli startled at small things. A door closing too hard. A voice raised across the street. He started leaving his phone on his nightstand volume all the way up like he needed to be reachable at any moment. I didn't push. I just made sure I was there. A few days later, we went to Lowe's. It wasn't a big moment, didn't feel like one at the time. We just needed paint. Eli had mentioned almost offhand that he always liked that shade of blue he had when he was little, the one with just a hint of gray in it. Calm, quiet. So we stood there in the paint aisle looking at those tiny square samples like they held more weight than they should. This one I asked, holding one up. He tilted his head, maybe a little darker. I grabbed another. He nodded. Yeah, that's it. We didn't talk about anything important on the drive home. Just traffic, a guy cutting someone off, whether we needed milk. But when we got back and started taping off the edges of his walls, I heard something I hadn't heard in a while. He laughed. Not loud. Just normal. And I held on to that sound like it mattered. Because it did. Greg sent a letter. Not a text, not a call. A letter. It came about a week after the hearing, tucked into my mailbox like something from another time. I recognized his handwriting immediately. I sat at the kitchen table and opened it. It wasn't long. He said he was sorry. Said he should have paid attention. Said he didn't realize how bad things had gotten. There was a line in there that stuck with me. I thought I was keeping the peace. I read that part twice. Then I folded the letter, slid it back into the envelope, and placed it in a drawer. I didn't respond. Not because I didn't hear him, but because some things you don't fix with a reply. Danielle disappeared for a while. Her Facebook went quiet. No more smiling pictures, no more soft captions about prayer and patience. A few weeks later, she posted something vague. Sometimes the truth is complicated. Trust that God sees everything. No one really engaged with it. People move on quicker than you think when the image cracks. Eli started settling in. Slowly. He still had nights where sleep didn't come easy. Still had moments where he'd go quiet out of nowhere. But he also started leaving his door a little less open. Started eating more. Started asking normal questions again. Do we have anything for lunch? Can I borrow the car Friday? Little things. Regular things. One evening we were sitting on the couch, some old show playing in the background neither of us was really watching. He leaned back and said, "It's weird." "What is?" Not feeling like I have to watch everything I say. I nodded. Yeah, I said. It takes a minute to get used to that. He was quiet for a second. Then he said, "Thanks for coming that night." I looked at him. "I'll always come," I said. He nodded like he believed me. That mattered more than anything that happened in that courtroom. I still keep the binder. It sits on a shelf in my closet now next to that old notebook. I don't open it much anymore. I don't need to. It did what it needed to do. It didn't destroy anyone. It didn't make a scene. It just made sure the truth had somewhere to stand. If there's one thing I've learned from all of this, it's this. You don't always win by being louder. Sometimes you win by being steady. By writing things down. By paying attention. By refusing to let someone else tell your child who they are. If you've ever had to sit quietly while someone twisted the truth, I hope you know you're not alone. And if this story meant something to you, stay with me. There's more to tell.